Good morning. All of you here in the forum and all of our streamers, welcome to All Saints Church. If you are new or visiting this morning, I would like you to know about future events here at All Saints. We've got a lot going on, and there are green contact sheets at both doors. So before you go, if you would take a moment and give us your information, we will be able to connect you to all of the rich offerings here at All Saints. It is my great honor to introduce to you Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams. Reverend Angel has been called the most intriguing African American Buddhist by the Library Journal. She is an author, activist, master trainer, and founder of Transformative Change. Her critically acclaimed book, Being Black, Zen and the Art of Living with Fearlessness and Grace, was hailed as an act of love by Pulitzer Prize winner Alice Walker. And her newest work, Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation, is igniting communities to have the long overdue conversations necessary to become more awake and aware of what hinders liberation of self and society. Reverend Angel applies wisdom teachings, embodied practice to intractable social problems, and gives us hope. She's a leading voice for transformative social change. Her work has been widely covered, including in the New York Times, Boston Globe, Lion's Roar, Miss, and Essence. And as Angel says, and it's become almost a mantra to me, love and justice are not two. Without inner change, there can be no outer change. Without collective change, no change matters. So I would also like to introduce her partner, Alana Williams. Let's say hi to you. Sorry. And I want to say yesterday when Reverend Angel and I were talking, she said that she's only been home for 5 weeks since last January doing, yes. So almost as soon as she touched down in Oakland, she came to be with us this weekend, and we are very, very grateful for that. So without further ado, Reverend Angel.
Good morning. Good morning. You are a beautiful group of people. I am a group of people. My partner can attest to this. It is really lovely to see you here, and I am especially happy to see the faces of the folks that were here yesterday for our workshop, which we call a Radical Dharma Connection. It is connecting race, love, and liberation, which is not something that we do enough these days, which is why I spend a lot of time out on the road trying to do that. And so for those of you that don't have much of a context, I'll give a little bit of context. So I wrote this book, my second book, Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation. It is co-authored, thank you, with my dear Dharma brother, Lama Rod Owens. He's a Lama, which is in the Tibetan tradition of Buddhism, the Kagyu lineage, and he's a Lama, and he's a Black queer man, so he's rather unusual. I'm less unusual as a Black queer woman, as a priest in the Zen Buddhist tradition, but I like to think of myself as a bit of the un-Buddhist. And also co-authored with Dr. Yasmin Saidullah, who is now a scholar at Vassar College and a student practitioner of mine who discovered Buddhism in her studies, in her college studies, the way many people have. And so this book we like to joke, came out of a conversation between Lama Rod and I after the officers were acquitted for the death of Eric Garner. For those of you that may not remember, he is the fellow, the common phrase, "I can't breathe," came as a result of the videotape that filmed him saying that he couldn't breathe as he was being held down by 6 police officers. And so those police officers were acquitted. And because Lama Rod and I, we're not the only black Buddhist teachers, but we're a little more outspoken than a lot of the other teachers. I think that probably has something to do with our age. And we are rather, have always been rather vociferous about the connection between social justice and our lineage and our practice as Buddhist practitioners, and really pushing back at the Buddhist community and at the yoga community, at the mindfulness community at large, people that have found themselves in relationship with the more Eastern relationship to spiritual path, and chastising them for allowing such clear teachings about liberation to still be held within a container of white supremacy and white privilege, such that the teachings are not set free to do the work that they need to do, to liberate even the people that are teaching them, right? To liberate even the people that are teaching them. And one of the things that I said yesterday is that it's important to remember that for the most part, all of the Western convert Buddhists that you see, so not heritage Buddhists, but the Western convert Buddhists, we're all also something else. We're all also have grown up and steeped in the traditions of our families and our communities, so we're all often also Christian, if by just by soaking, if not by practice in particular. We're also all mostly also Jewish by the nature of the experience that we have in our lives. So, you know, many times we hear different quote-unquote religions and we think, wow, those folks have nothing to do with us, they won't understand us, and we're not quite that way, because we're all converts, essentially, right? And so as converts, we're very much steeped in our own histories and traditions. And I am a New Yorker, which means that I am also Jewish just by osmosis. I know the Jewish holidays almost better than I know Christian holidays, because we got them off for school, because you couldn't have school in New York City without Jewish folks showing up. So we had to shut down for all the Jewish holidays, so I grew up very appreciative of my Jewish culture. And we all speak a little bit of Yiddish. I mean, it's just part of the New York vibe that we all speak a little bit of Jewish. So by nature, we are multicultural as Buddhists. And some of us try to hide. I kind of hide behind, like, I'm a Buddhist, and so, you know, I don't quite understand everything else that's happening in the world. And this is one of the things that we push back at, that we don't have a right to use any of our spiritual teachings to hide away from the experience of social realities, that our spiritual lives cannot be divorced from our political lives, because there is no such thing as a split between them. And if we're splitting between them, then we ourselves are not being truly aligned with the truth of our own spiritual choice, our spiritual path. So one of the things that is very clear to me is that the times that we are in is not a political crisis, it is a spiritual crisis. And the crisis, now I used to say this and I meant one thing. I meant the thing that you probably think I mean. And then I have come to realize in the way that I've come to realize that radical Dharma is not my work, but I am its work. That I am its work. That when you are working on ascertaining your truth, your Dharma, your calling, your truth, your vibration, what is calling you into truth, and what is calling the truth from you, what is calling you to be your truth, and what is calling you to express your truth for the sake of others, is interlinked, interchangeable, or mutually co-arising with universal truth, with the truth of everyone else's calling into their own truth, so that we can't separate those things. There is no such thing as just my truth that is not co-conspirating. I'll make that up. With the multiplicity of truths, so your truth, and your truth, and your truth, Monique, and your truth, Simha, and your truth, Gabby, and your truth, Victoria. My truth is inextricably linked with your truths. And our truths are linked with a collective universal law or truth that all of us must abide by. The truth of birth, the truth of death, the truth of old age and sickness, ill health. Those universal laws that we must all abide by. Some of us are working hard to try not to abide by them, but for now, we're still abiding by those universal laws. And one of the explicit things that exists in the set of understandings or the teachings that Buddhists lean into is the truth of suffering. And the truth of suffering sounds like, wow, you all throw a really bad party. That's what you lead with, the truth of suffering? But what I would say is that the historic Buddha, who was a man, who was a man of privilege, that entered into confrontation with the realization of his privilege. He was previously cloistered away, hiding from the truth of social reality. And his father, who was given a reading of Siddhartha's potential life paths, was told, you will either be a great king or he'll be an amazing spiritual adept. His father was of the warrior clan, the Kshatriyas, whose work it was to actually protect the people. That's what a warrior clan was about, right? Not warring upon, but rather protection of the peoples. So naturally, his father wanted him to follow in his footsteps and did everything he could to keep Siddhartha from being able to see and be in contact with social realities, because he knew that if this young man who had the seed of spiritual adeptness in him, if he came into contact with suffering, then the only option that he would have was to meet that suffering where it lived. So the story goes on to say that he was kept in his perfumed robes and his beautiful hair, and hidden behind the palace walls, he was taught all of the arts and all of the things that one needs to know in order to take his role eventually as a leader of the warrior clan. Not the kind of kings that we think about, right? Absolute power kings, but rather someone that holds a noble position that is in protection of the merchants and the workers and the people that didn't have access to arms. So always a noble man, always an Arya, a noble man. But he slipped out of the palace because, curiosity is real. So when you try to contain someone, then they wonder, what are you trying to contain them from? So he traded his beautiful robes for ragged robes. He traded his privilege for the experience of the common people. And he slipped out of the palace, and he saw someone hunched over, dirty, clearly suffering. He said, "What is that?" And they said, "Oh, honored one, that's illness. And this person doesn't have a home." And Siddhartha was, how could he not have a home? Doesn't everyone have a home? Because certainly everyone behind the palace walls had a home. And then he went on, and he saw someone, and they were just bones, basically, flesh that had deteriorated on bones. What is that? "Oh, honored one, that is death." Why do I not know about this? Why do I not know about this? Clearly my father has been keeping me away from what is happening. And how can I be a good king if I don't know what is happening with the people? And so he kept those robes, and he took to homelessness so that he could understand the experience of the common people, of old age, of sickness, and of death. So right from the beginning, the founder, if you will, of what we have come to call Buddhism, which in its own right is a Western construct, right? The founder understood that what he needed to do was he needed to meet the suffering of the people. Does that sound familiar, Christian folk? Does that sound familiar? That he knew that regardless of the station of his birth, that he could not be of service to the people if he was unwilling to meet the people where they were in their suffering. This is very, very important. Because so much of what we live in our lives as people that even have the privilege to be here today is we live in a state of imagined suffering. I'm not saying that we don't have pain and we don't have suffering in our own lives. But when we really consider, for instance, the people that are living without access to a minimum wage of a mere $15, much less a livable wage for Pasadena, California, we're still imagining their suffering if we haven't been in that position ourselves. And so in some ways, we are all operating from behind the palace walls of our own privilege, of our own access, of our own ability to tap into resources. And we don't truly understand the suffering of people that don't have the kinds of privileges that we have. And for sure, I know there are people in this room that are counting the things that they are suffering. I understand. that each of us are suffering in our own particular ways. And that, in fact, is the gift that we have available to us. That we don't all have to go and have the experience of living on the streets in order to know and meet the suffering of those that live on the streets. In fact, it wouldn't be real. I've done street retreats myself, and always in the back of my head was that little bit of thing that knew that come Sunday evening, this was going to be over. And as I shivered under the bypass of the Supreme Court in Oakland, it was about 30 degrees in a March evening, I still knew that I had the privilege of returning behind the palace walls. And I couldn't divorce myself from that knowing, from that understanding. But some years later, I was diagnosed with lupus, which is an autoimmune disease. And there was a time in that experience where I couldn't walk from my front gate and to the car by myself, unsupported. And to get out of bed in the morning was a half an hour exercise. And there was a moment that I was lying in that bed, reflecting on my able-bodied self, my strong self, my self that knew what it was like to have access to strength, to clarity of my mind, to being able to speak to people and understand them clearly. And as I lay there a little confused and feeling a little broken, it occurred to me that I may stay exactly where I was, that the state that I was in may be the state that I would continue to be in, and that I had a choice that I could hang out there in the back of my head, hoping that the palace walls would open to me again, or that I could meet that suffering where I lay, that I could allow myself to enter into my own suffering and accept it. I had to really accept it, to accept being disabled, to accept being unclear, to not have my sharp mind available to me, to accept needing help from people just to take care of my basic day-to-day needs, to accept that I didn't know how my livelihood was going to be made anymore, to accept that everything that I had built up may in fact come crashing down, and that I had no strength or wherewithal to put it back together again. And I was at a decision point of deciding whether I was going to allow myself to be homeless in the way that I had known home, or whether I was going to make home in the truth of my suffering. I chose to make home in the truth of my suffering. As you can see, I'm sitting here in front of you, fairly able-bodied, slightly less clear-minded, still confused. And I can tell you that I would not trade that experience for anything in the world. The arrogance of my privilege is regularly set aside. All I have to do is remember lying in that bed in the realization that the way I had understood my home, and when I say my home, I don't mean the edifice that I lived in, I don't mean the bed that I had, I don't mean the people that I knew, I meant the home of the truth of who I am. That I had to leave that home and be in the truth of the suffering that I was in. And through that truth, in that truth, for the first time, not through a street retreat, living on the streets cold for a few days, not through my sitting meditation, my practices, my bowing, not through my liturgy, not through my hope or through my aspirations, but only through my suffering was I finally able to meet the suffering of others. Was I finally able to stop clenching up in my body when I saw someone homeless, trying to figure out my escape route? Was I only able to look eye to eye with people that were differently abled, severely disfigured in their appearance, mentally challenged, or just somewhere in my mind, not as smart as me, not as capable as me, not my equal, not worthy in whatever strange ways we come to decide that, of my attention, of my presence, of my love. So it was only through meeting my own suffering was I able to disarm the disconnect from the suffering of others. Now, I'm not alone in that disconnect. I know I'm not. And I know I'm not because it's what I have been taught. It is what I, despite my good teachings, what I have been steeped in the media, in the culture, in the ways of policing and governing of this country. I learned all the ways of dominance and violence and aggression and disconnect, and it lived in my body. And the only way that I could find my way out of it was through not my imagination of other people's suffering, not my goodwill, not my good intention, not my deep practice of meditation on the cushion, but by choosing to meet and witness and bear witness to my own suffering, by choosing to acknowledge that I coveted my strength, that I coveted my strong mind, that I coveted my intelligence, that I made the mistake of believing that that is what made me who I am, that those qualities were my home, rather than the truth in my heart of my connection to every other human being that was suffering, that is suffering. All of us are being taught these lessons of comparing, of locating ourselves above someone or below someone. That's violence too. Of finding ways in which we can either live behind, return to, or try to get behind some palace walls. But not often enough are we reminded that the only home that we can choose to live, in which we can meet the truth of suffering, is by meeting the truth of suffering in our own hearts. By meeting the truth of the suffering of our own disconnect from other human beings, based on the color of their skin, their ethnic heritage, what level of education they have, whether they speak the king's or queen's English clearly, whether they're serving us from behind a counter, whether they have this degree or that. All of this is the illness, the suffering of domination, the suffering of rank, the suffering of dividing ourselves from the truth of our human heart. And that is not our home. That is not where the kingdom, if you will be governed from. The only kingdom of glory that exists is the one that is beyond the palace walls. The only connection to people is the connection that lives inside of us, and our commitment to meet suffering where it lives in us. Because when we judge others, when we disconnect ourselves from others, it's not about them, it's about us. It is about the fear of the mirror before us. Will I be old one day? Yes, indeed. Will I die? Will I have ill health? Yes, these are universal laws. But also, will I be in poverty? Will I lack access to education and health care? Will I not be able to speak English clearly, articulately, to get what I need? Will I be black or brown and lose all of the things that I have access to because I'm not black or brown? Will I be an immigrant or a foreigner and have fewer rights? So when we cannot look into the suffering of others, let it be known that is an indication that you have not yet looked into the suffering in your own heart. That you're not feeling pity, you're feeling fear. Fear that has not yet been met. And you have an obligation to leave home from behind the palace walls and find the home of your heart, the home of your love, the home that only lives here. Thank you so much.
Questions?
Or complaints. We take complaints here. If you don't mind, if you'd say your name and pronoun before your question, please.
Yes, my name is Betty Cole, and my pronouns are she and her. One of the things that you said yesterday in the workshop was talking about the way racism, the system of racism, polices white people. It may fall, it does fall harder and more directly, I think, on people of color and poor people, but that my experience of how it polices white people that I've only relatively recently become aware of is like it's like a soft, toxic cloud that wraps you up. And the way I've found the policing of it is the self censoring that you learn to do after you bring up the subject of, wow, I am getting more and more concerned about racism in this country and why it is that those of us who are in places of privilege aren't more overt and demonstrative and connected to trying to do something about it. And I say those things at a dinner table with my very good white friends and they just, you could see the veil coming down. It's just sort of like, I am now invisible. Do not touch me with this. Do not make a scene. Do not ask me to go there. I don't want to talk about it. And it is so profoundly felt that for me, learning how, and now what? What was my next step? And I realized over and over again in my life, in times of turning point times, there's always a contest between fear and love. And I think for lots of white people, fear wins most of the time because what passes for love is just comfortableness in our tribe. And the niceness that keeps our comfortableness within our white ghetto intact. And so thank you for giving me that observation. Whiteness is policed all the time.
Yes. So for those of you that may not have a little bit of context, the statement that I made is that, so I defined whiteness, not as white people, whiteness is a culture. And you know it's a culture because people that have different ethnic backgrounds, different heritages that have come from all different parts of Europe get here and share same behaviors and ways of being, practices and protocols. Dr. Yasmin's favorite word is protocols. Practices and protocols that bind them such that people that are not white will say, that's white folks doing that, that's whiteness. So we experience the solidity of whiteness even though there's no such thing. So it's a culture. That's what happens when there's culture. So culture is essentially something that is present shared practices and protocols and ways of being that become palpable because they are both implicit and sometimes and explicit agreements. But with whiteness, it's mostly implicit agreements. Because there's no good reason that people of such different backgrounds, communities, experiences, families, histories, etc., should be able to create spaces that have a sameness, whether they're a southern sameness or a northern sameness or an east coast sameness or a west coast sameness. So there's a sameness. So that's what I mean when I talk about whiteness. And those practices and protocols are designed to police white people, so that white people implicitly protect white supremacy. Because you couldn't just, how many of you can I convince to just abide by white supremacy explicitly? Yeah, there we go. So the soft cloud. Anybody here for white supremacy? Would you like to, I got a sign-up sheet. So the soft cloud of whiteness is what polices white people and keeps them silent. But the most important thing, Betty, that we want to name is what are you being threatened with? You're being threatened with belonging, the continuation of your belonging to whiteness. Taken to its extreme, you're being threatened with blackness. There's always a veil of fear that if you don't abide by the practices and protocols, you will be disbelonged. If you think I'm not telling the truth, go ahead and try to bring up some conversation that threatens power and privilege, the power and privilege that is commanded by white-bodied people in this country, and go try to bring that up at the dinner table. Well, unless you have a special dinner table. Some of you have special dinner tables. And watch, as Betty said, the veil come up. The veils come up when something is being threatened. Ask yourself, what is being threatened? Comfort, yes. But if you push that comfort, what is the threat? I'm not telling you ask them what is the threat. I'm asking you to ask yourself, what is the threat? What is it that you fear? And I'm asking colored folks, when you swallow your truth, what is at risk? What is the threat? What is the truth that we all need to confront in ourselves that allow us to maintain the practices and protocols that uphold not racism, folks. We're not upholding racism. We are upholding white supremacy. And if we don't call it what it is, we'll just move the pieces around on the playing field. Call it whatever you want. But if you don't name it as white supremacy, as the disease, and you keep talking about the symptoms, all of us will remain ill.